Croeso pawb, welcome to the launch of the 2035 Net Zero Challenge Group reports. This is the webinar launch. The reports are on the website. I'm Sam Ward, Head of Climate Cymru, and we're very happy to have Jane Davidson, former Environment Minister, a key architect of the Future Generations Act, and of course, the chair of the 2035 Challenge Group, who's going to talk us through the reports, give you an overview, but also really help you really get under the surface of it, of how you can kind of use them and what they're for, and what they look like, and how the repercussions on for Welsh society. So a bit of quick scene setting before we launch into it. 65, 70 organizations represented here today. Really welcome to have all you amazing folks listening. Questions will come afterwards, drop them in the chat. We've already had some submitted. For those who don't know, Climate Cymru is a network of 370 organisations and thousands of individuals around Wales, brought together by shared values. The desire for urgent, fair action to address the climate and nature emergencies, and action that represents and takes into consideration the voices of the people of Wales. So we do all sorts of stuff. We often act as an umbrella organisation to kind of, when a unified voice is needed, and to represent voices and to make sure those voices are being heard in the corridors of power. That's actually our origin. But we've also become, some people describe us more like a mycelia, if you want to use a geeky word, to the connection between lots of different projects and people and organisations, cross sectors, all around Wales, and hosting moments like today. So here we are. If you're not familiar, you can find us climate.cymru, and the newsletter is there and easy to find, as well as joining as a partner. There's no fixed obligation, and you know, plug yourself in, and we really work hard to create value and unlock value for the partner network. So enough from me. Really excited to get into it, and over to you, Jane.
Thank you very much, Sam, and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for giving us the time today and the chance for me to talk through the work of the Wales Net Zero 2035 Challenge Group. Quite a challenge to do that in a relatively short time, since for us this has been around 2 years of work distilled into 7 reports. And what I wanted to do in the session today is not only to talk about the sort of key messages, but also, I hope, introduce you to the reports. They're all free. They're all available on our website. They were launched on Monday of last week, and therefore they are accessible to everybody. They are available in English. They're available in Welsh. And in addition to the reports on our website, you will also find introductory statements from myself as chair in both English and Welsh. You will also find similar statements from Hugh Arranca-Davies, Deputy First Minister and Climate Minister, and Sian Gwenllian, the originally designated member from Plaid Cymru at the start of the work, who has worked with us all the way through. The reason that our work started was because of the cooperation agreement that was signed through the then leaders of the Welsh Government, Mark Drakeford, and Plaid Cymru, Adam Price, in 2021. And I actually feel incredibly proud of the fact that Wales wanted to own up to the fact that it was unlikely to achieve its climate obligations by 2050, and sought to deal with that by accelerating action. And what we were asked to do, as you can see in the cooperation agreement, is independently advise the government and Plaid Cymru on the best ways forward in terms of delivering on an accelerated timetable, bringing it forward from 2050 to 2035. Importantly, we had to look at how it would affect the people of Wales, and how adverse effects could be mitigated, and how to share costs and benefits fairly. And this led us immediately to looking as a group, and I collected a range of independent experts together from across Wales, UK, and indeed more widely in the world, to look at the key areas in terms of emission reductions, those highlighted by the Statutory Committee on Climate Change, which, for example, was an observer on the group alongside Welsh Government and others. And as a group, we decided the best mechanism to underpin our work was to use Wales's Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And this was helpful in two ways. One, that actually the Act not only is enables Wales to be the first country in the world to translate the UN Sustainable Development Goals into law through its 7 goals, which you see outlined in front of you. But the Act also requires 5 ways of working, and those are on the left-hand side of the screen, that we should think long-term, we should think preventatively, we should collaborate with each other, we should integrate outcomes, and we should involve people about whom decisions are being made in terms of the whole of the public sector in Wales and Welsh Government. And this builds on 4 pillars, which are the traditional pillars of society, economy and environment in the context of sustainability, but also, and really importantly, on culture. And for culture, not just in the context of a kind of standard definition of culture in relation to our own languages and our own cultures and the importance of arts and cultures in terms of our lives, but actually about the values that we put into place when we take decisions. And the values are critical, because if we are going to create a safe world for future generations, we have to make a safer world for current ones. And the independent group from many backgrounds, many of whom had never even heard of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act before, all decided that this should be the basis for the work that we did. We also felt that actually, in terms of making sure that our work was not only going to deliver outcomes, but also help look at what kind of processes would be effective in delivering those outcomes, we set up a set of arrangements that hopefully people might feel could be replicated elsewhere. We looked at all those enablers, which are also risks in the context of the work underpinning our work. You know, how we were going to deal with issues such as finance when we wanted to create co-benefits. And if you start thinking about it in that way, you have to look at how you can, for example, make sure that you can have a financial strand that will deliver on co-benefits. So we felt that there were all these elements that we had to take account of in terms of how we took our work forward. We also decided that, you know, in a sort of traditional focused way, we set up reference groups. One was on enablers, which is all those risks elements and how risk can become opportunities that you saw in the previous slide. But the others were related to the biggest emission reduction areas as outlined by the Climate Change Committee. But because of those 5 ways of working, which I've been through, we wanted to make sure that throughout all of our work, we kept the idea of participation and engagement at the heart of what we did. And when you think about the fact that really what we were was a task and finish group commissioned by 2 political parties. So we could just have sat in a room and put our heads down, but we were not prepared to do that. We wanted to have academic underpinning, and therefore we asked the Welsh Government to fund the Wales Centre for Public Policy to produce a sector reports on all these big emission reduction areas, which they have done. And that work is completely independent of ours, and you can pick it up on their website. But the importance of that work is that our group then had to assess the best routes forward, but also make sure that in those routes that we were testing that academic evidence. And I'm delighted to say that that work between us has both consolidated that academic evidence and also ensured that our work is academically underpinned. So if you look at this slide on our participation model, we wanted to both have these individual reference groups And we wanted them to test as widely as possible through partner organisations what our developing conclusions looked like. So all the groups worked very differently, and I'll come to that in a moment, but they all were required to do that, to test and socialise their conclusions. They all were required to test with relevant stakeholders and the public what their conclusions were looking like. And they all worked with the particular term of the Wales Youth Parliament to actually test our conclusions with young people in Wales. And although we would have loved to have had a citizens' assembly or something like it during our process, it turns out that when you're a task and finish group, you're not an entity and can't be funded to do such a thing. So we have got some very clear proposals in our report about deliberative democracy type approaches that should be taken forward by both government and Plaid Cymru, and indeed other organisations interested in testing what our work has looked at. So the framework looks something like this. The Wellbeing of Future Generations Act is also unique in having the concept of planetary boundaries enshrined in law. So working within planetary boundaries, i.e. we were really strongly conscious of our ecological footprint and the role of nature-based solutions, using the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, having our cross-cutting arrangements in terms of the work of the groups, having a participation model that meant that all groups had some requirements to take forward rather than just sit in a darkened room and write another academic report. And actually looking also at how we could get benefit from that interrelationship between the challenges. So that is the model to which we worked. And we were able to launch, therefore, the 7 reports outlined on this slide last Monday. And the suite of 7 is important because the summary report is a very quick overview of the kind of work that we did. And although we hope it'll be very useful to people who want to just have a quick understanding of the concept of the work, actually, this is a huge project. We have had that underpinning academic work. We have had literally hundreds of people involved in conversations in terms of our reference groups. We have presented the work in many wide locations on a draft basis in terms of finalising our conclusions. And there's still more work to do to campaign, to lobby and test the conclusions that we've come to in terms of developing pathways. But fundamentally, the way these reports are completely different from anything I've ever read before is there's so many reports about the need for action. And I've been involved in writing many of them myself over the years. But actually, and then people don't really admit to not knowing what the action should be. And one of the things that we hope we can really help with in this work is that our reports both look at what we're covering and why we've chosen those areas to cover. And in many cases, that's because we're looking at the optimal approaches to delivering by 2035. And then every one of these reports has a detailed pathway. Now, this is just an example that you see on the screen from the education report. And I'm not suggesting you'll be able to read it because you can read it all by accessing the reports in full on our website. But we've taken an immediate term from 2025 to 27, i.e. things we would want the government and in particular in this context with the support of Plaid Cymru to do now. The near term is 2027 to 2030, and we've taken that as a block because there is a general election in Wales in 2026. So obviously anything that comes through in manifesto commitments and gets translated into action, we'd want to see actions delivering by 2030. And there are some legislative obligations for that anyway. And then that longer term for us in the context of our 10-year pathways is 2030 to 2035. So the pathways look at what needs to be done, whether that's policy or action, and who needs to do it and by when to deliver on these outcomes. So this is actually a delivery pathway, a delivery plan for any organization in terms of wanting to take the actions that we propose based on the best academic evidence. And also in the report, we talk about opportunities. Now, opportunities is not just a rose-tinted spectacle approach. It's the fact that one of our key conclusions is that if we don't act now, it will be a lot worse, because actually planned delivery is much better than responding to unplanned shocks. And since every week demonstrates the range of unplanned shocks governments are dealing with across the world, we still are in a timescale where planned delivery of outcomes will deliver us much better opportunities. And then there's a section that actually looks at the pathways that I'm showing you just an illustrative example of now, and then gets underneath each of those elements. Why have we chosen that element? And also uses references and case studies to make sure that it is very clear. And the final piece on our approach is each of the different sectors. If we think about it, you know, food, massive, very, very different sector in terms of all its elements. And in fact, it's never been treated as a sector politically here in Wales, or indeed in any other country. So if you think about food, but you think about energy, where lots of responsibilities lie with the UK government and fewer with Wales. You look at buildings, you look at connections, there's a whole range of things in interplay. So in each report, we also tell you why we took the approach that we've done and what that approach is. Now, we're not expecting you to kind of like immediately capture all the kind of shorthand executive summaries from our work in this presentation. But we're just showing this to you as an example of what the report looks like, what the executive summary looks like, and then you now have a sort of aide-memoire on how to look at the work. But I think what's really fair to say is that actually in all areas we can see massively important co-benefits in terms of what outcomes in Wales could look like, and that these co-benefits are in line with co-benefits that Wales has been exploring, in fact, since 2009. And I was responsible for a report which was called One Wales, One Planet, and some people on the call may have seen that. And we looked back at the vision that was outlined by the then Climate Change Commission for Wales on what One Wales, One Planet would look like if we only used our fair share of the Earth's ecological resources. And so much of the vision that then was outlined in 2014, when Peter Davis, who'd worked with me so much on that 2009 work, led The World We Want, the Wales we want in the context of the world we want, in 2014 to influence the UN and the Welsh Government. And, you know, Peter's work, working with a lot of young people, and a vision for Wales that people wanted in 2014 was very much along the similar lines to those in 2009. So we've seen a trajectory which this work fits into. It's not dramatically changing what Wales wants to see, which is particularly articulated in the Goals in the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, but it is articulating a way to get there, because the gap between what Wales wants to see and the Wales that we are living in is still huge, as it would be in any other country. So how do we bridge that gap? And we've really focused on delivery pathways to do that. So the shorthand message from our summary report and the overarching reports we're calling Pathways to a Prosperous and Resilient Wales in a Changing Future is that it is a massive increase in ambition needed, both in the government, but also in a societal mandate for change. And I'll come back to that, that there are huge benefits to the Welsh public and that urgent action is needed now to get those benefits. Otherwise, the costs will be so high that potentially we will not be able to start the action, and only a planned transition can be a just transition. And then looking at those risks and enablers, one of the key things is, how important is this for the government? Is it important enough to stay in the department of the First Minister? Now, in many ways, we've been lucky because the Deputy First Minister is also the Climate Minister. And in fact, if that stays at that level of governance, that's a very, very important cross-cutting cabinet level signal. So, but we do feel that if it becomes a departmental portfolio equal to all the others, that is part of the problem. It has to be with somebody who can exercise greater influence. We have to optimize those ways of working I described earlier. You know, people are getting better at thinking long term. They're getting better at thinking preventatively, but we're still not good at collaboration. We're still not good at integrating outcomes, and we're still not good at all at how we involve the public in decisions that are made about them. They should be with them and for them as well as about them. So how do we get these better mechanisms in place? How do we support local authorities, because they are the closest to communities in the democratic sense in terms of taking this work forward? How do we fund it? And so we are saying something here about a blended finance initiative, which is public, private and citizen finance, which is because we know that the Welsh Government budget will never be enough to do this work and will always be pushed into reactive work if there's a challenge. So how do we create more financial opportunities that are ethical in this context? There are some kind of like more detailed recommendations, which is the planning system. The planning system underpins everything land-based. So actually changes in the planning system, really radical changes in the planning system, to do what I wanted to do in 2011, which was only enable net zero housing. And yet here we are in 2024, and still that is not a requirement in the planning system. So if we're going to do this, we have to really take hold of all the levers of government. Wales must play its full role as a net zero champion. And that's been helped enormously by the fact that at the weekend, the UN General Assembly actually decided to follow the Wales approach, and this was agreed by the world, of having a Future Generations Commissioner's Office. So Wales is going to have to lift its game, since the world will very much be looking to Wales now as the only country with the legislative mechanism. And that point about restoring nature at pace and scale, we absolutely commit to that, but we feel that there should be another piece of work done by somebody else in a similar way to this work that really looks at what the actions to deliver on a 10-year pathway for the carbon sequestration and increased climate resilience by nature is done too, because the two together, this work and that, would give a complete portfolio of actions for any existing or incoming government. So thinking about the more sectoral approaches, education, jobs and the future of work, you know, we feel that actually the new curriculum is really helpful in this, and the fact that it's not fully populated either. But unless we put these issues right at the heart of that curriculum and then ensure that irrespective of whether you're in further education or higher education or out in the workforce, you have access to climate and nature literacy models. And we have to create a carbon and nature literate workforce. So there have to be continuing professional development pathways, CPD pathways. There has to be an audit of what goes on in tertiary education, and of course we've got a new tertiary education new oversight in Wales, and that might be something it wants to take on. But we also like the kind of like close to local models. Carmarthenshire County Council climate action groups, for example, we feel is a very interesting models for others to look at. And to really encourage this in the workforce, a green skilling Wales. Now, one of the things people always want to do is overhaul an education system, but we've already done that. And therefore we start, in a sense, literally 15 years ahead of any other country who wants to start that process. Because I started the pilots for our current new education system on foundation phase and the baccalaureate back in 2003. And it only became the national curriculum in Wales in 2022. So it takes a long time to change an education system. We've done that. So now we need to make sure that that education system actually grows to ensure that we have this carbon and nature literature workforce for the future. This was probably the biggest challenge. How could Wales feed itself by 2035? Because it's not a sectoral issue. There are so many components within it. But I mean, our key elements have been, you know, how do we get just transition for farmers and growers with long-term financial support and extended tenancy agreements? We have so many barriers in the system. I mean, that tenancy agreement issue, I was really shocked to find that the nature of the tenancy often means that the limit of 5 years maximum, and often you cannot change the land during the tenancy. And therefore, in doing so, with so many tenancies in Wales, it mitigates against any of the change that we absolutely need. So we have to take all these barriers out of the system. How do we prioritise locally sustainably produced food through public procurement? That's done some changes, but it's not doing enough, because if, as they've done in Copenhagen, where they've mandated public sector involvement, in fact, about organic food, then we can ensure that mandated, regulated delivery would then feed all the public sector in a way that would be better for Wales, and could also develop local markets, new distribution chains. Underpinning this has to be a new land and marine use framework and a national food strategy that encompasses all elements. How do we reduce the dominance of livestock production and incentivize growing a wide range of sustainable crops to replace in imports, which is back to that just transition point for farmers and growers? But some people on this call will know that we don't even grow enough horticulture to feed Wales, let alone anyone else. Our fruit and vegetable growing at the moment is absolutely dismal. We know that our fruit and vegetable needs in Wales are not met at all by our current provision. Horticulture is somewhere between 2 and 3% of our needs, and yet it is on only 0.02 or 3% of land, and therefore a tiny amount of land will be needed in terms of fulfilling Wales's needs. So what opportunities are there to take that forward? And a big one, and it's always a big one, that carbon literacy and climate literacy is also about food literacy. It's about health literacy. It's about literacy in the education system that helps people make better choices. And then when we're looking at how Wales meets its energy needs, another big principle for us in doing this work was how much extractivism is in the current system. After all, water is extracted from Wales, energy is extracted from Wales, industrial output is extracted from Wales, generally, other than jobs, without a benefit to Wales. And that's been a principle that's been in place since the Industrial Revolution. So one of the things we wanted to do in all our work was tackle that notion of extractivism. And so, you know, in terms of energy, Wales has got so much to offer. I mean, particularly in the context of solar and wind. But so we had some underlying principles in terms of what we're going to do in energy through a fairer and more circular energy system that unlocks decarbonisation across all parts of Welsh society and provides significant benefits and opportunities for the people of Wales. Through a more resilient energy system where people, households and businesses are less vulnerable to supply disruptions and price spikes from fossil fuels. Through a well-functioning energy system developed through processes and takes a whole system view, including for communities, offering better participation and ownership, and for a rapidly decarbonised energy system that operates to the highest ethical and environmental standards. And I think that that point about the community ownership is particularly critical. And you'll find that there's a lot of elements in terms of the kind of things that we're saying, which is how do we get the right balance in terms of ensuring the specific role of community energy and how that can be locally beneficial. I think one point to be absolutely clear about is what we haven't done here is included those new technologies, or so-called new technologies, which have not delivered outputs. I mean, we're very keen potentially on tidal power, and we're very keen that the Welsh Government continues to support innovation there through its demonstration models. And we're very keen that the UK government should support first of a kind proposals so that people can really test at a scale that will be useful to us all in the future. But I remember as Energy Minister back in 2008, handing out one of the first grants for carbon capture and storage. And we've spent so much on that as the state in the UK, and we have not had the outcomes. It is a real apology for a policy. If we put all of that funding into delivering renewable energy, we would be in a far better state than we are now. And Britain's in a pretty good state anyway in terms of that. And you know, it's only this month that the last use of coal disappeared. So yeah, there's a lot to be thankful for. In the context of heating and building, there's been a lot of work done on this. There could have been lots of things done in this notion about heating and building homes and workplaces. But in actual fact, there is still a real resistance in Britain, not elsewhere, but a real resistance in Britain to the use of heat pumps, even though if you look at you know, somebody like Octopus Energy, and in fact many of the companies now are actually offering installation of heat pumps in ways that can be done that spread the cost for the customer and also benefit from government grants. But we have to prioritise the installation heat pumps. But when we tested some of this, we found that actually there are still all sorts of building fabric and planning restrictions that are completely unnecessary in the context of the change of one to another. So yes, there has to be a major funding of insulation for fuel poor homes. There has to be low interest loans for homeowners who couldn't otherwise have access to loans. There has to be local delivery partnerships. All of those elements are really important, and we've got to make sure that people are trained. When solar power was first introduced and I was the Energy Minister, we put all sorts of funding from the Welsh Government into making sure that people were properly trained. And I was really excited about that. And I attended a lot of these courses and I met a lot of these trained plumbers, and then they couldn't get the work because actually the customers were still utilising traditional products because that's what they knew. And now the advantage now is heat pumps behave in a way that most people understand. And now that there are better radiators that can work instead of people having to have underfloor heating, etc., there are all sorts of ways in which this can be done. And we know that countries across Europe, which are far colder than the UK, are actually growing great guns on all of this, and people are having much cheaper outcomes as a result. And our final one in terms of our groups was about being connected, and connected is mostly in people's minds linked with travel, but it's also about the digital connectivity. I mean, it's absolutely appalling that not all places in Wales are properly connected up to good broadband at the moment, which is absolutely key in the sense that that can mean that people can work from home. It's also about the fact that the nature of Wales, the poor systems of transport being addressed very well in South Wales in terms of the new mechanisms, but they will not be in place for a long time. But, you know, absolutely kudos for that being done, the new metro system and all the links to other transport elements. But actually in Wales, it's all about the car. So it has to be about how we change our use of the car, how you have more electric cars. I mean, Norway this week, EVs are now the largest number of vehicles on the road, and the cost to the consumer is dramatically reduced. So it's all about the car, and it's all about how to make sure that there can be really easy to access car sharing or Lyft or other arrangements linked to bus travel and others. So the group have been really imaginative about how to travel less, travel differently, and travel better. And I think the very exciting point that I've already mentioned is that we now are in a situation where Wales is being looked at by the rest of the world. A large team of Wales, mostly young people, and young people from across the world over the last 5 years have actually been really developing what they wanted to see across the world, a major international view, including from the global south, what they wanted to see in terms of the UN delivering on a pact for the future. Now that took place yesterday. That took place last weekend. A pact for the future was agreed by its own delegates on the Saturday, and on the Sunday, the UN General Assembly voted for the pact for the future. And the final version still includes the proposal for a special envoy for future generations based on the Wales model. And therefore, Wales is going to be very much in the world's public eye. We're not on track to deliver on our climate commitments. And the part of the reason for our publishing our report at this time is because the Committee on Climate Change gives its next advice to the UK government in February 2025. And as Hugh Aranka-Davies says in his introduction to our reports, this report is really important in helping the Welsh government determine what they can do to meet their obligations under carbon budgets. The Climate Change Committee will then be giving its statutory advice to Wales in May 2025. And since they've been involved in this work all the way through, we hope that some of our pathways will make it into their advice to the Welsh Government. And that is statutory advice. And that will be really useful in terms of any incoming government in the May general election in 2026. And if both political parties sustain their support and look at these pathways positively in the context of the people of Wales, we will see some very different action. And that means that we also have to see much greater citizen engagement to ensure that the mandate is there for any government of any political colour. And in fact, we all have to be part of that mandate. One of the things the House of Lords report in 2022 said that about a third of all this work will actually need to take place in our own homes. And therefore, we have to somehow look at how to build the trust and confidence and financing of this in terms of ensuring that Wales is best prepared for the future ahead of us. So if I finish with the John Rawls theory of justice, do unto future generations what you would have had past generations do unto you. Thank you. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Thank you so much, Jane, for the insight and all of the work that you've done on a voluntary basis, I should say. What an amazing group, and all of the reports, and definitely urge everyone to get stuck into the reports. Are really digestible, and there's summaries and so on, as Jane mentioned. There has been questions submitted from the network in advance, and there's a bunch more in the chat. So I will get straight into a few of those, if that's okay, Jane, before we stop the recording. And then feel free to drop more in the chat. And if you are here and you've submitted it, I will sort of call on you just to sort of, so it's not just me reading them out. So I'll call you in a moment. But the first question was about food, and it's obviously a hot topic. And there's some really great stuff in the report, and well evidenced as well. But the question was about culturally, socially, and politically. It's a really challenging topic. So how do we move forward on this, and who needs to take it up, and how do we actually make the change happen, Jane?
Thanks. I think although there are a lot of individual recommendations and proposals for action on a pathway, which requires some regulatory issues and others, I think our big take is that this has to be joined up. At the moment, what we're seeing is a bit of marketing of food in one department. We're seeing the issues around farmers in another department, which kind of divorces them from the marketing. We're seeing kind of like appetite for food in public services and discussions around free school meals in another department. We're seeing issues around obesity in another department. And actually, we absolutely need to either for there to be an overarching responsibility in the cabinet for food that is able to look at all those issues, and or a lot of further independent work. Now, I know that the Commissioner for Future Generations is really keen to lead a major piece of work on this. And for people on the call who are particularly interested in the food issue, the work that Shay did for WWF previously, the work that Professor Terry Marsden did from Cardiff University, working with WWF on using the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, we're starting to develop a holistic model for how we tackle food in Wales that would definitely ultimately end up in the change in ministerial portfolios and responsibilities, and a proper all-nation, all-sector approach. So I think that that's a report. It's the most detailed report, by the way, because there is so much evidence coming in from the food strategy in England, from the land strategy in Scotland and others. All of these things are interconnected. So in a sense, one of the things we start with is this idea there must be a land and marine use framework, so we really know what we're going to prioritise in Wales in the context of food or energy or nature or anything else, because otherwise people essentially are promoting competing activities on the same land or sea. So we have to really look at this issue and frame it in that sort of way.
Great, thanks for that, Jane. And there was a suggestion in the chat, maybe if we could stop screen sharing now that we're doing Q&A, then they can see your face in full as we're doing that. So I'll leave that with you. There we go. And then the next question, it's exciting in the report. It's not only possible, but also all of the benefits. It's big in all threaded all through the reports. You've mentioned it in the talking as well, in what you've just said. So other than the obvious existential climate benefit, what's it going to be like to live in Wales if we actually do these pathways? How would our lives look and feel different? Stepping out of a report mode for a moment and just kind of what does Wales look like?
Well, I think what was been really interesting about this work, and I referenced the initial report on One Wales, One Planet in 2009, is that actually, people in Wales, they want to live in safe, viable communities, and at the moment, it would be hard to say that we do live in safe, viable communities. We want to live in good housing. We want access to good education. We want access to good healthcare. We want to live in high quality of nature. And of course, this year, we've seen the fewest butterflies we ever have. And then we suddenly find that we have 30 nicotinoids neonicotinoids that were banned in Europe are still in use in the UK, or were brought back into use by the last government. And so there are connections. So I think it's the notion that there is so much going for us in Wales because we are very community orientated nation. There are a lot of us who live in cities. There are a lot of us who live in the countryside, and those of us who do that tend to live in quite spread out communities. So how do we make those communities vibrant wherever you live? And I think it's bringing things down to a local level. So probably if you look at a word that will appear hundreds of times in the report from every single group who worked on it, it will be local. It's how do we translate that kind of global obligation to something that benefits us all locally so people can see the benefit. And if we think about the kind of jobs issue, the green jobs issue is absolutely enormous if government is brave enough to start and getting on and funding it, because that does mean a lot more people will be working in areas that will be beneficial to us all for the future. So it's not so, we didn't want to lay a kind of utopian vision, but what we did want to do was to say that the best of Wales could be enhanced in a huge way. The purpose in Wales could be enhanced in a huge way if we did all the things we've been saying we wanted to do for the last 2 decades and turn them into action that delivers on outcomes. It won't stop the unintended shocks, but all the things that we're talking about will make us a lot more resilient. And I think that point about resilience is actually very much tied to prosperity for the future.
Thank you for that. So maybe we'll do one more question, Jane, and then we'll sort of close it off, and then people can. I've got more questions that I put in that have been dropped in the chat as well, but maybe we'll stop the recording. But the last question, which is amalgamation of about 3 questions that came, which is a theme of the question, is so Climate Cymru is a huge network, right? We've got these 370 or so organizations, and we've got probably 65 different organizations or so that have been part of this call. The question is, what would you like the network and those outside of it that care about these issues to do now? What can be done to help make sure the pathways are adopted and it really unlocks and delivers the benefits and the change that the group aspires to? What would you like us to do next?
Well, I think what we're all going to be doing as group members is to advocate for the pathways. I mean, I just can't emphasize how important it is, particularly in the run up to the 2 COPs, the Nature COP and the Climate COP. And we're in New York Climate Week at the moment. And we'll end up with a lot of discussion around can we keep to 1.5? And that discussion is an important one, but it's the discussion that stops people getting on with the action of delivery. And I think that's what we've really found in doing this work over the last 2 years. I expected that I'd be able to turn to a range of other countries and look at their climate plans and their nature plans in terms of doing our work. And I couldn't find any that had, for example, got a clear plan with the outcomes planned to 2035. And so what we've done is actually unique, again, from a small country, but I hope will be useful for everybody who is interested in this space. And when you look at what's coming through in the chat, for example, you'll see that every year something more is added to it. I mean, Jess McQuaid has just said, that Climate Cymru's WWF's new work on linking food and climate. So every year people are doing more. But if we could get the government, if we could get Parliament in Wales, the Senedd, to sign up to the idea of the pathways No cherry picking, because cherry picking's been the problem in the past. To sign up to the pathways, then we would all be very clear about delivery outcomes. And they can also, therefore, be measured, those delivery outcomes. And one of the key enablers for us is actually a forensic approach from the First Minister's office, creating new brokers in the civil service who are always able to interrogate, making sure that there are clear and measurable targets in terms of the delivery of the individual elements, so that it is a forensic, laser-like approach in terms of ensuring that this is done. Because the only way that we will meet our obligations under legislation will be to do that anyway. And if we want to make sure that we improve quality of lives, we need to do that in that way. Now, I know that I think probably there's one other thing I should say, which is, you know, when I used to do interviews as a minister, whoever was interviewing me, however much they were supportive of this, would finish and say, but why do that in Wales when China, when America, when you know, Australia, when Qatar, when UAE and others, and Azerbaijan, the next host of the COP, you know, are doing things that mean that what we do is irrelevant. I just think that incredible example of the UN signing up, over 170 countries signing up to an idea that started in Wales and now going to be looking to Wales for leadership, means that we actually have the opportunity. So everybody on this call, everybody in your network, you need to read the reports. You need to see in your own context how useful the pathways are to you. Interrogate them by all means, because, you know, we have given this our best effort, but there'll be others with other information that need to be added. And they're not set in stone, but create pathways. Don't just argue about targets. That is the single, I think, most important piece of advice. Create deliverable pathways so we all can be part of the action that changes Wales.
Well, thank you so much, just on behalf of everyone for the work, and we'll definitely there'll be lots more discussions on this and opportunities that will sort of ignite through the Climate Coming Network. So join the newsletter and join as a partner if you're not already, and let's make this happen. Really exciting times. So thanks very much. I'm going to stop the recording.